One of the teachers says to Mary, "Mary, the high priest wants to see you." So they're in the temple. Mary looked at her somewhat surprised, but does not ask any question. She only replies, "I will go at once." I do not know whether the large hall which she enters is the house of the high priest, or whether it's part of the dwellings of the women assigned to the temple. So the person speaking here is the author, Maria Valtorta. She's commenting on this vision that she sees. I know it is wide and bright, tastefully arranged. In addition to the high priest, a stately man in his robes, there are also Zacharias and Anna of Phanuel. Mary bows down on the threshold and does not enter until the high priest says to her, "Come in, Mary, do not be afraid." Mary looks up again and slowly moves forward, not because she is unwilling, but because of a somewhat unintentional gravity which makes her look more of a woman. Anna smiles at her to encourage her, and Zacharias greets her. "Peace to you, cousin." So for those of you who don't know, Zacharias is the wife of, her name slips my mind, the woman who gave birth to John the Baptist. So, does anybody know it? Is it Sarah? Elizabeth, thank you, yeah. So Elizabeth is married to Zacharias. Zacharias is a high priest, and Elizabeth is Mary's mother's sister. So that's why he says, "Peace to you, cousin." The high priest observes her very carefully, and then he remarks to Zacharias, "She is obviously of the stock of David and Aaron." "My child," he says to her, "I am aware of your grace and goodness. I know that every day you are growing in grace and knowledge before God and men. I know that the voice of God whispers his sweetest words to your heart. I know that you are the flower of God's temple, and that a third cherub is before the testimony since you are here. And I would like your perfume to continue to rise with the incense of every day. But the laws are different. You are no longer a girl but a woman, and every woman must be a wife in Israel to bear a son to the Lord. You shall follow the commandment of the law. Do not be afraid, do not blush. I am aware of your royalty. The law that prescribes that each man is to be given a woman of his own stock will protect you. But even if that were not the case, I would do so that your magnificent blood might not be corrupted. Don't you know anyone of your stock, Mary, who might be your husband?" Mary lifts her face full of blushes. Her eyes are shining with tears, which begin to appear, and with a trembling voice she replies, "No, nobody." It is not possible for her to know anyone because she came here in her childhood, and David's race has been struck too severely and scattered too widely to allow the various branches to gather like foliage around the royal palm, says Zacharias. "We shall then leave the choice to God," says the priest. The tears that Mary had restrained so far gush out and fall on her trembling mouth. She looks imploringly at her teacher, which is Anna. Mary has consecrated herself to the Lord for his glory and for the salvation of Israel. She was but a little child just learning to read and write, and she had already made her vow. So she's referring to her vow of wanting to be a virgin and wanting to live a celibate life. "Is that why you are crying, Mary? Not because you wish to resist the law?" "Just for that, nothing else. I shall obey you, priest of God. This confirms what I have always been told of you. How long have you been consecrated to the Lord?" "I have always been, I think. I was not yet in this temple, and I had already given myself to the Lord." "But you are not the little one who came 12 years ago and asked me to be allowed to enter?" "I am." "Well then, how can you say that you already belong to God then?" "Well, if I look back, I find I was consecrated. I do not remember when I was born, neither do I remember how I began to love my father and my mother. But I said to my father, 'Father, I am your daughter.' But I remember that I gave my heart to God, although I do not know when it started. Perhaps it was with the first kiss that I was able to give, with the first word that I learned to say, with the first step that I took. Yes, I think my first recollection of love, with my first steady step. I had put all my heart in God, and with the exception of my father and mother, whom I loved in life and in death, every other worldly thing had disappeared from my heart. But you have made me think of it. I must find when I gave myself to God, and the things of my first years come back to my mind. I love that grotto because I heard a voice sweeter than the song of the water and the warbling of the birds say to me, 'Come, my beloved.' I loved those herbs covered with tinkling and sparkling diamond drops, because I could see in them the sign of my Lord, and I used to say to myself, 'O soul of mine, How great your God is, he who made the cedars of Lebanon for the eagles, and has also made these little leaves that bend down under the weight of a little mosquito. And he made them for the joy of your eyes, and as a protection for your little feet. I love that silence of pure things, the light breeze, the silvery water, the purity of the doves. I love the peace that hovered over the little grotto and descended from the apple and olive trees, now full of blossoms, and then laden with beautiful fruit. And I do not know, the voice seemed to be saying to me, yes, just to me, come, come, sweet apple, come, sealed spring, come, my dove. Sweet is the love of my father, sweet the love of a mother. Sweet their voice is calling me. But this one, oh, in the earthly paradise, I think she who became guilty heard it, and I do not understand how she could prefer a hiss to this voice of love. How could she desire any other knowledge that was not God? I then said, here I am. I am coming, I am yours. No one will have my body but you, Lord. Neither will my soul have any other love. And while saying so, it seemed to me that I was saying over and over things already said, that I was fulfilling a rite already fulfilled. And the chosen spouse was not a stranger to me, because I already knew his ardor, and my sight had been formed at his light, and my capacity for loving had been fulfilled in his embrace. When, I do not know. Beyond life, I would say, because I feel I always had him, and he always had me, and that I existed because he wanted me for the joy of his spirit and mine. But now I obey you, O priest. But please tell me, how am I to behave? I have neither father nor mother. Please be my guide. The priest says, God will give you your husband, and he will be a holy man, because you have entrusted yourself to God, and you will tell him of your vow. And will he agree? I hope so. Pray, my child, that he understand your heart. Go now. May God always accompany you. Mary withdraws with Anna. Zacharias stays with the high priest. I think what's really cool about this story is that we have the mystical approach to the spiritual life. Begin from the premise that God is very real, and God is seeking to have a personal relationship with you. And many times you'll hear in churches, you'll hear people say, well, God has a plan for your life. And most people, when they hear that, they kind of cringe inwardly, because it doesn't seem like that plan is going to go well for them. People have this idea that when you say God has a plan for my life, that I'm sure it's going to suck, which is very strange. I don't think people understand that until you actually start to go, okay, I want to see what that's all about. What is that going to look like, that God has a plan for my life? Think of it very simply, that God has a desire for you to become fully immersed in the consciousness of Christ, which is the consciousness of truth and love. And from that point, you are interacting with the God self that exists within you, and you are forming a life. It's not such that, well, you're supposed to go here and do mission work, and you're supposed to become this kind of person, and you're supposed to, live a chaste life, and you're supposed to have a big family. That's not how God works. Because why would God give us free will if he just is going to go, here are your orders and your walking papers, and I don't want to hear anything about it? It doesn't make sense. Now, we get a little attached to our free will because we have a society, we have a world that's not very loving. So the idea of trusting authority to say, don't worry, I know what's good for you, it's very scary for people. Now, Mother Mary had a real strong connection to God. And the way she's speaking about it, I don't know how I know this stuff. She's saying, I don't know, I felt like I've always loved God, even before life. And what we teach here is that she was sent to live a mission, that she did have a purpose before in the spiritual side and was sent here to do something. But for whatever reason, God kind of obliterates your memory and doesn't really allow you to know everything from the past. So she hasn't really come into the full awareness of who she is. Here's God going, oh, well, this one really, really loves me, and she's been sent here to bear the Christ. So that's not going to go over well if she's going to have a child and there's going to be no man in her life, because think about it. Back then, people were pretty barbaric. Single mothers were not seen the way they are now. Plus, where did the child come from? So God's going like, well, if this is going to work out, we're going to need to have a man in the picture. So how is he going to take care of that while also honoring her desire to be a virgin? Well, he's going like, don't worry, I can figure it out. It's not that difficult for him. He's God. But from her perspective, it just seems like her whole world is caving in on her. What she wanted so badly is not going to happen. Now, if you can fast forward, I don't know how long it takes from that moment to the point where she's married to Joseph and she's actually had the experience, what's known as the Annunciation. Maybe that's a year, maybe it's a year and a half, I don't know. So it's not like 10 minutes later when she says, okay, I'll do what the priest says, that all of a sudden she's enlightened and realizes why. There's a long period of adjusting and having to go like, wow, this is not what I thought. And she probably had a lot of feelings. I mean, right in that moment, she definitely had an emotional reaction. She started crying and she was upset. Now, she was trained in the temple since she was 3 years old. So she probably has a decent handle on her emotional reactions. This season is really a dedication to Mother Mary. And really how I want you to think of that is a dedication to the feminine within you, which is a lot of cool stuff. But primarily it's about being in relationship with your feelings and your emotions. Probably the hardest one is love. What is God trying to do there? God is trying to love her by fulfilling her deepest prayer, which is she would like to serve God at the highest level that she can. So God's going like, this will be great. She is going to be the one that bears the Messiah. She will be the one who experiences the Immaculate Conception. But in that very moment, it appears as though God has abandoned her plan, and she has a lot of feelings about it. But really, God is trying to love her by preparing her for something much greater. And even in that, you'll remember from last week's reading, and it's in the reading that you have in the handout that you got this morning, the reading about the Annunciation, that when the angel comes to her, he still says, this is what is ordained for you, but it's on your choice. We await your word. Would you like to do it or not? That's a really critical thing to realize, that you will constantly be, if you really want to live this life in communion with God, and you really want to fulfill a life that's pleasing to God, God will ask you, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? You don't have to say yes. If you can understand that God is trying to love you through that, then it will be hard, but you will grow and you will expand into the true soul that you are. So I have something I want to encourage you to do, something I would like to urge you to do, and maybe even challenge you to do, which is I would like you in the next couple of days, as Advent starts today, I would like you to consider if you can make this prayer, that you invite God to love you through this season in order that you would come to the Christmas, to the birth of Christ, and you would be transformed. It doesn't matter where you're at on the path. It doesn't matter if you're just starting or if you've been walking the path for years. It's always a very good prayer, because wherever you're at, God can expand you through love to a greater and deeper consciousness. The reason that that's scary is because we don't know what's going to happen as a result of that. If you say, God, I would like your love to come upon me in a way that I can be truer to myself and know Christ. Now, what may happen is doors may open and you might start to see yourself being urged in a certain direction because you're asking God to do something in your life. In others, you may find doors closing. In either case, you're likely to have feelings. When the doors are open, you might have excited feelings and nervous feelings and anxious feelings. Oh, am I really supposed to do this? Is this the thing you want me to do? I mean, I did pray to God that your love would be with me, that would move me. Or what if things that you were working very hard on all of a sudden start to fall apart? And you go, I wonder if this is God trying to close off something that's not right, that's too driven by my fear or my ego or whatever. So when you pray for God's love to work upon your life, things are going to happen. And you're going to need the connection to your feminine side in order that you would not, go, well, this is too much, or this is really not fair, or I don't want to do this, or even just like, you know what, I'm going to forget the whole thing. I'm going to go to this party and just drink and just kind of be a normal person. When you make this prayer and you're sincere, things are going to happen. And just like with Mother Mary, what's happening to her is not what she was hoping for. But somewhere down the line, she's going to look back and go like, oh, I see why it had to be this way. And probably she would say, thank God that my training was to say yes and not get all tight and weird and freaked out. As things begin to happen to you, and they will happen to you with greater certainty if you really devote yourself to a spiritual season, so that you would meditate daily, that you would pray regularly, a couple times a day, pray upon awakening, pray at midday, pray before you go to bed, that you would make this season a season of devotion. This is the perfect season to do it because the outer world approaches its pinnacle of darkness. And I don't mean darkness in weird activity, I mean outer darkness. December 21st is the darkest day as far as the least amount of light. So really you're being called in this season to move more inwardly. And the spiritual world works in an inverse manner. So the more darkness outer, the more light inwardly. And that's why Christ was born a few days after the solstice, because it's right at that pinnacle of the dark time. It's also symbolic for the Christ coming through at the darkest time. But you have to work at this. You have to, you have to work at getting to your meditation each day. And in the handout that you have, there's some recommended practices. One of the best things to do over the season is to focus on forgiving people who have hurt you. And there's a prayer in there that you can recite at each day at the end of your meditation. You can recite this prayer of surrendering any of your animosity and bitterness and anger and fears and whatnot, stubbornness, etc., and just go, I choose to forgive this person. Some people you'll be able to forgive easily in one meditation. Other people it may take you the whole season before their consciousness shifts in that direction and you can really let go of that anger. But this is a good time to do it. I want to give you a couple of other pointers around the Divine Feminine and the feminine in you. I want you to think of the feminine as the aspect of wisdom that is within you. That's an element of Mother Mary as well. That as a result of going through things, when you experience stuff, you gain wisdom. You can read about stuff and gain knowledge. But when you go through something, when you experience something, you gain wisdom. And that wisdom is because you see how something played out firsthand. And there's there's real power in wisdom, in knowing, because you had the visceral experience of it, because you felt things, that you now can speak with a different authority. So, as you go through this season, let's say you are going to make this prayer. You can make it as we're kneeling for communion shortly. You can make that prayer. I want the prayer to be sincere, and I want your heart to be all in. I don't want it to be this somewhat nervous prayer of like, well, God, if you can love me, like now, sure, let's give it a shot. Like if you're not ready to go, okay, God, I really want to experience this season. I want the Advent to be an adventure. Think of it like that. It's going to be an adventure into love. That I really want to open myself and go, this year I really want something powerful to happen to me. And I'm calling forth your love without any restrictions. I'm not saying, don't do this and don't do that. I'm saying, I am the servant of the Lord, let it done to me. Let it be done to me according to your word. Now that takes guts, I admit. But God is only love, so it can only be good. We may have some temporary discomfort along the way as we see things begin to unfold. You'll get to the end of the season and you'll have wisdom because you'll have gone through something. While you're going through it, I really want you to use the meditation skills that you've learned to process the feelings that come up, to make sure that the decisions that you make as a result of what you feel does not separate you from God. If something difficult happens, you should go into meditation and go, what is God trying to communicate here? Sometimes, as we've talked about in many of the classes, it's my own karma coming back to me. And God is trying to wake me up to stop a certain attitude or a certain behavior. It's not God punishing me and torturing me. It's God accelerating the karma so that I can make the realization. Other times, it's God going like, I'm going to close this door because this does not lead, to your salvation. It does not lead to a good place. What you're investing your energy in here is not correct. So I'm going to stop it because you asked for my love. And if I love you, I can't let you continue on that path. Now what we do as humans go, well, I don't want to offend them, I don't want to hurt the person. I mean, it doesn't look like it's helpful, but I don't want to upset the boat. And that is not love, actually. That is not love. And so God will not do that. But God will do things in a gracious way, and we're learning to be gracious like that. If you want to be somebody who can be the beacon of light on this earth, you're going to have to learn to communicate difficult things at the right time and in the right tonality. That may be part of your Advent season. But more, I would like you to look at being the recipient of how God is going to try to move you closer to Him. To streamline your life that it may be mostly about, your relationship to God. And that you may reach this point where you can go, God, I do want my life to be, I do want to follow a plan that you have for me. So how does that work? Well, you have to have the relationship. And so this could be the beginning of a new phase of the relationship where you go like, okay, God, I call forth your love, I want it, I surrender to it, and as I go through the next 4 weeks, give me the consciousness that I don't disconnect because things get difficult. And when things are really good, let me remember to praise you and to be grateful. And more than anything, keep me true to these practices. Make time in my life for meditation. Remind me to pray. Remind me to deal promptly with emotions. And if you have difficulties, please reach out to me. This is what I'm here for. Email me and go, this came up, I made the prayer, is this part of it? What do I do next? That's fine. That's okay. I got lots of time during the day to respond, and more time in the evenings because less class is going on. But have the guts to make a prayer like that and cultivate the awareness of Mother Mary and call forth that divine presence of her to help you become a balanced feminine individual. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. One thing I was thinking about, I was meditating on this morning. If you look at the process of a woman having a child, what you have at the beginning, you have the presence of the masculine to ignite a process, right? If you just think in terms of how a child is conceived. And then you have 9 months where it's really just the woman who experiences the growth of this baby within her and then goes through the birth. The masculine does not go through that except, of course, in support. So you could think of it like this, that today I want you to decide if you're ready to make this kind of prayer. And let that be the masculine in you that has the courage and the confidence to say, I will call forth God's love, and I will do it boldly without any restraint. And then the feminine in you is what will go through it over the next month. We'll have to experience it. The masculine comes in times of trouble to remind you and to be that decision maker. Okay, what are we going to do here? It's better to meditate now before we go to bed, or, just the masculine energy will keep you on track, but the feminine in you is what goes through it, which experiences and feels it. So I think it'll be kind of cool to watch yourself go through this season with that perspective.